So we're on the top of Lamed Tesamid Beis, and Yechiel made a comment here, which I'll relate to in just a minute. Says Sofo litztayer tachas bail. We're now again on the top of Lamed Tesamid Beis. The Gemara invokes a legal principle in damage laws that if a person is victimized and suffers a certain pain, and the Gemara understands that the pain here right now is not the psychological pain, but rather physical pain of a first intimacy, breaking of her this. If you in tort law, if you Masechet, how do you say in English? You damage. There's got to be a better word than
injure.
Injure. Okay, if you injure a person in a way that we could determine, it's very rare that it comes up in Jewish law, that injury was inevitable, then it's almost as if the injury already took place. And in Ilchas injury, there's something called tsar. Amru lo, the Chacham say, what are you talking about? Ain't a doma nivelis be honest, the nivelis be rotten. Gemara completely strikes Rabbi Shimon off the record. A rape situation is not to be equated to a woman who's having she's consummating her marriage with her husband, as much as there's some pain involved, but that pain is negligible. So don't tell me that she would inevitably have to suffer that pain. Since we're saying now that even in the case of what? Of Chavta al Gabi Shirayim, he still has to pay tsar, which obviously we're talking about a different tsar, not the tsar of Chavot al Gabi Karka, but tsar shel Pisuk HaRaglayim. Now, honestly, Rabbosai, I do not have access, and this is honest to goodness, to art scroll. This is one of the few occasions where I would need an art scroll, because the way I understand Pisuk Raglayim is that somehow he has to separate her legs in order to have access to what he wants to do as a race.
She's resisting him. She's resisting, so he's forcing her legs open.
Yeah, but the problem is, Bobby, the Gemara is going to apply this to case of Mafata. I can't figure out what's the Pisuk Raglayim. I don't get it. Anybody here have an art school by any chance? You shouldn't admit it, because if you admit it, I'm going to ask you every shir. Oh, okay, we only have one more shir. But V'cheinu Omer, and he quotes a stark musar, a tochach of Yechezkel and Novi against Klal Yisrael. V'tefaski es raglayach l'chol over. That your worshiping of idolatry is like a zona who's willing to spread her legs, pardon the expression, but I'm just translating the pasuk, for any person who's willing to pay the price of having this relation with you. Ihachi says the Gemara, Mafuta Nami. Mafuta, as you know, is a case of a woman who is consenting to have this relationship. So if you're talking about breaking the Basulim, that I can understand, but the Gemara has rejected that at this point because the Gemara says that we don't understand the different shitas and so forth and so on. So the Gemara has to come up with a tsar in the bia itself. And the Gemara is saying in a dome, a tsar of nivala shalover tzona, right? That's called ones to a nivala beratzon. But now the Gemara is saying that as far as Pisuk Raglayim is concerned, both an ones and a mafuta suffer the same pain. So I don't understand exactly the mitzias of Pisuk Raglayim. And I have a feeling in my bones that Pisuk Raglayim only applies to the very first bia. I mean, a man could be married to his wife for 100 years. Ad mea v'esrin. So you're going to tell me that every time he has a relationship with his wife for 100 years, there's Pisuk Raglayim? Obviously, we're talking about a basula. So I don't know exactly, what the Pisuk Raglayim is all about. I thought maybe the English translation would help me. The art scroll, just probably because he was embarrassed, He completely skips this whole Gemara. Omar Rav Nachman, Omar Rabba bar Avua. Now the Gemara is going to tell you the following principle in psychology. Do we have any psychologists here? Well, actually, I don't know if you have to be a great PhD in psychology to understand the Talmudic psychology here. The Gemara is going to say that within the context of a pleasurable act, something that is intuitively and innately, fundamentally pleasurable, a small, low flame pain is not even felt. It doesn't even register. That an episode on a psychological level, in terms of the way you experience it, is to be viewed as one entity. And there's like bittul barov kind of thing, or bittul b'shish. Gemara says the following: Omar Rabba, and each Amora gives a different mashal. Omar Rav Nachman, Omar Rabba bar Avua, mashal lebefuta lemad averdom liodem che Omar lechaver krashi rayim shalivi pote. Okay, that's the most fundamental sheet of the Tanoim, which is not psychological, but rather that if a woman says to a man, I invite you to have this relationship, then obviously she is not going to suffer the pain of pisuk raglayim. Again, it's also psychological. So the Gemara says the following: are you telling me that we're operating within the framework of mechila? Right? You're telling me that if I say to you, rip my clothing and you'll be potter, I've given up my rights legally to sue you for damages. That doesn't apply here. The avuanin, those monetary rights belong to our father. Elam Rav Nachman Omar Rabba bar Avua, he retraces his steps. Pichal sheben omros, the women who have an insight into human psychology, mefuta ein lo tsar. So the Gemara says, what do you mean mefuta ein lo tsar? We know that she has a tsar. Again, I don't know how to fit this into pisuk raglayim, but it has something to do with the fact that she's never had, he's like opening up the canal, I don't know exactly what you want to call it, for the first time. Amar Abaye, Amali Aim, that's the woman who raised Abaye. Abaye was born without a mother. Kemaya Chamim al Reishi de Karch. You know, a person is bald, and hot water, when you take a shampoo or a hot shower, is very pleasurable. But the only thing is, the first drops of hot water that hit his bald head are painful, but he doesn't feel that pain. The overall oneg somehow swallows up the pain. And Rava gives a different much to the same idea. Amali Bas Rav Chizda. Rava was an Edim, Ishver was Rav Chizda, and Bas Rav Chizda, I don't know why he has to call her Bas Rav Chizda, he could call him his wife. Apparently, there was a certain distance in that relationship. He rivda de kusilia. Okay, when you extract bloodletting, which was very popular back in the day. Somebody told me that there are those who want to bring it back into mode even today for high blood pressure. Anyway, what they do is they prick the body. You've all had it, right? Probably most of you have had a booster, or what do they call it, inoculation, and somehow in the case of the Hakazas Hadam, if it relieves you of the built-up pressure from high blood pressure, you don't even feel the needle going in, even though there is a feeling of the needle going in. Rav Papa Amar Amrli Bas Abasura, the daughter of Abasura, regarding the Tsar of Pisuk Raglayim, he says, Ki nama akusha bechinchi. If you take hard bread and you chew on it, it's very good. It relieves some of the pressure in your gums, but on the other hand, there is a certain element of pain, but the pain is completely lost in the tainug, in the pleasure. And this is the principle called Hana'a Goveres al Hatzar. The Mishnah says, "Ones no se miyad hamafata l'shiyotzi l'shiyotzi." Ishtohi. What are you talking about l'shiyotzi? He's married to her. If you're using the word l'shiyotzi, it means he's married to her. So how can you tell me that he decides whether or not he wants to marry her, and then you apply the principle of shayotzi, he's divorcing her? You have to rewrite the script l'chshelo yichnos. When it says l'shayotzi, it means when he made a decision that he doesn't want to marry her. And Tanya Nami Hochi Afal Pisha Omru Amafater Nosen l'chshelo yichnos. You see here it doesn't say l'shayotzi, it's more meduyak. It says l'chshelo yichnos. And Moshe Subagam Nosen miyat. In other words, what depends upon whether the marriage will happen? The knas. If the marriage happens, then there's no knas. If the marriage doesn't happen, he pays knas. But as far as Moshe Subagam, he pays immediately, because that has nothing to do with marriage. That has to do with Nezikin and the loss that she suffered as a result of the Maisabiyah. The Brisa continues, the father or the daughter, both in the cases of Ones and Mafata, have veto rights to decide they don't want the marriage, even if the Ones and the Mafata in both cases would want to marry her. I understand why in the case of Pitui, the father has rights to veto this marriage. Ksiv im moin yemoin avia. If he decides not to allow this marriage to take place, it won't take place, and the mafata will pay the knas. How do we know that she too has veto power? It says a double language, and that's a ribui, and the ribui is telling you that she could veto the marriage. Ella ones, in the case of ones bishlema ihi, I understand that she could say, I don't want to marry this ma'anis. Siv below sia, and sia means birtsona. She wanted the marriage. Midaita elavia minolan. How do you know that he has veto rights? And I think the deeper meaning of this Gemara is that she may be in a desperate situation after what she experienced, and therefore, if she wants to marry him, get the father out of here. Imagine this Shalom wanted to marry this woman, and he went ahead and raped her. The father did not want to accept him as his son-in-law, but now he forces the father's hand. How? By being a no good chote. That we can't allow. Rava says, no, I'm going to derive the father's ability to veto the marriage from a kal v'chomer. Why? Ma mefate shelo avar el al dasa via bilvad. In the case of the mefate, she consented. Is bein hiu bein avi yecholim liakev, and despite the fact that she consented, nevertheless the Torah says that she could decide she doesn't want to marry him and veto the marriage. He, the father, could likewise veto the marriage, and that we derive from the pasuk Ma'ain Yima'ain. Ones sha'avar al das avia ve'al das atzma. In the case of Ones, she was raped. It was against her will, not only against her father's will. As Lokolshkin, how much more so should the father be able to veto the marriage? Rav Alomar Kabaye Keva the Komik Shalim Knas Lav Chote Niskar. This is not a Chote Niskar. You think he gained something? He's going to have to pay a knas of 50 chamishim shekel kesef. That's a heck of a sum of money. Abai Loomar Karava. Abai rejects the kal v'chomer of Rav with the following pircha: Mefate de iu motzi mi'akev avia nami motzi mi'akev. In the case of Mefate, I understand that the Mefate himself could say, I'm out of here, I don't want to marry this girl. Then it makes sense that we should give veto power to the father as well. But Ones, in the case of Ones, where the Ma'anis doesn't have rights to veto, we're going to force him to marry the girl. Maybe the father shouldn't be given rights to veto. She desperately wants to marry this Shlom. So
Oh.
now, again, for those who want to stay another 3 minutes, we'll just finish it up. Tanya Idach, we have another brisa. Afal Pisha Omru. Ones, no saying miyad. In the case of Ones, he's got to pay the knas to the father immediately after the Ones. Ishayotzi, who ain la alav klum, he does not have to pay the ksuba. Billy Plud, once he pays the knas, he gets away with paying the ksuba. Gemara immediately asks, Kishayotzi b'mafik mafikle. The Torah says he has to remain married to her, and the Torah says lo yuchal l'shalcha kol yomav. He's not allowed to divorce her. Amo, let's reinterpret the brisa. Kishi teitzehi. If she sues for divorce, see, she sues for divorce. The halacha is not so bad. Even a woman has a right to sue for divorce in Jewish law, which by the way, is light years ahead of the Goyim. I mean, it took the Goyim about 2,000 years to figure this out, that a woman could sue for divorce. Anyway, just on the side, sorry, I couldn't overcome. Ein la alav klum. Now, she sues for divorce, but she cannot collect the ksuba because she already collected the ksuba. Why? Because the Torah says that the 50 shekel kesef is mar habasulas. And the Gemara is going to analyze this and have a lot of problems with this. Mace, what happens if after the Ma'anes marries her, he dies? Yatsa kesef knasa b'ksubas, according to the Tanakama of this brisa, she already collected the knas, and she doesn't have rights to the ksuba. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, yesh la ksubas mana. Again, she's not a basula, but she does deserve a ksubas mana. As any grush. The Maikav Miflagi, Gemara says, Rabbanan Savri Taima Maita Kinule Rabbanan Ksuba Kidei Shalote Kalavein of Lotsia. The whole purpose of the takon and the goal of ksuba is to inhibit his desire to divorce. He gets angry at his wife, wants to throw a divorce, and there's nothing inhibiting him unless we say to him, hey, listen, buddy, you're going to pay 200 zuz. That's a lot of money. But in the case of an honest lo motzi mafikla, he cannot divorce her. The halach will not allow that. There's no toleration for divorce. So what do we need a ksuba? Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda suffer. You know what? He's going to cause her such pain when he gets angry at her. She doesn't want to remain in a marriage with this guy. So you've already inhibited, if you don't inhibit him, he's going to make her life so miserable that she's going to beg for a divorce. And in order to protect her rights in marriage, says Rabbi Yossi, we're going to institute a ksuba, even though he paid the chamishim kesef. What's an ones shoseh be'atzitzo amalei rovim k'kasel l'rav michti migvar gomri ma'adadi? We learn a halacha of gzeirat shava from mafate to nes, and here on the top of daf mem is laha milsa nami ligmu me'adadi. Why not derive an analogy between the two? And just like in the case of Ma'anis, the Torah forces him, whether he likes it or not, to marry this woman, so too, maybe in the case of Mafata, the Torah is also, by virtue of this analogy, forcing the Mafata's hand to marry. And from the pasuk of lo indicates that he has given his approval, his consent, and he wants to marry. Okay, then Rabbosai, so we're here on the top of Daf Mem, and in Mitzvah Hashem, we'll have our last shir tomorrow, and then the Rebbe will be